When I was a child, I thought something lived in the dark. This feeling never left me, either day nor night. As I grew older, I began noticing strange things in my house, footsteps, even though I was alone, whispers coming from empty corners, and silhouettes that flickered in the mirror as if someone was watching me. I tried to ignore it, but it became more and more intrusive. My parents always said it was just imagination, that children are afraid of dark corners. But they didn't know that I wasn't alone in this house. I felt them, not only in the dark corners, but among the people too. It was like a constant presence. As the years passed, I noticed that these visions became more vivid, and the voice in my head grew louder. I didn't understand what was happening, but by high school, I started realizing I wasn't just afraid of dark corners. I could hear a voice telling me to do certain things. It was like a whisper that wouldn't leave me. I tried to push it away, but the more I tried to fight, the stronger its demands became. It told me I needed to be alone, that I shouldn't trust other people. It wasn't just fear, it was something more. Something hard to explain. Over time, the voice in my head became more insistent. It felt like an invasion of my life. It whispered that I needed to avoid people, that they were dangerous. These words sounded so convincing that I began to believe them. I became more withdrawn, spending my days alone, even afraid to look at my own reflection. I thought if I stayed alone enough, it would stop chasing me. By high school, I felt like I was losing touch with reality. My life was filled with conversations with that voice, which felt like my only friend. But the more I trusted it, the stranger its demands became. It started telling me that I had to do something to prove my loyalty. It said that only then would I truly feel its power. My thoughts became more destructive, and I couldn't stop them. I was being led down a path with no way back. The first loss happened that night when I decided to leave the house and got lost in the dark forest. The forest felt as alive as my thoughts. Each step deeper into it felt like a long, tense look into dark eyes. I heard the voice telling me to go, but it didn't tell me what awaited. It just said, "You need to do this." I had to follow it, not understanding what was happening. The voices grew louder, and I felt my own will slipping away. When I returned home, there was no one there anymore. Silence took over the house, and I realized I couldn't live the way I used to. The voices told me I had to find people to carry out their commands. I didn't understand what was happening, but it felt inevitable. I was blind to my own feelings and followed that voice as if it was an unstoppable force leading me. Time passed, but I still felt the voices. They never left me, and the more I tried to resist, the clearer their instructions became. They weren't just watching me, they were directing my actions. Everything I did became part of their plan. I realized I had lost the ability to distinguish what was right and wrong. My life had become a never-ending following of their demands. The voices began to become more demanding. They told me I had to rid myself of those who didn't understand me. And I followed their orders without realizing it might be a mistake. I couldn't stop, because they kept insisting that this was the only way to prove my strength. It wasn't just an action, it felt like I was becoming part of something much larger. I sensed my actions becoming an inseparable part of their plan. Over time, I began to fear not only the voices, but myself. I didn't know who I was anymore. I became a stranger to myself. I tried to find answers in books, talking to others, but nothing helped. I continued to act on the voices' orders, hoping they would finally leave me alone. The voices never disappeared. I lived with them, not realizing that it had become my way of life. Every night was filled with whispers and ominous instructions. I no longer knew what was real and what was fantasy. I began to doubt I had ever been a normal person. Over time, I began to understand that my actions had terrible consequences. I could no longer live with what I had done. I started searching for an exit, but the voices wouldn't let me go. I felt my psyche tearing apart, but there was nothing I could do. I was their slave, and they controlled everything that happened in my life. Having completely lost control, I made a decision. I could no longer live with what I had done. The voices no longer whispered instructions, they commanded me. I was ready to free myself from it all, but I realized that the final line had already been crossed. I hoped this would all end, but I knew there was no place left for me in this world. My father always said that on a farm, people should be valued for their work. He was a farmer himself, but as the years went by, his life became more and more strange. When I was young, I wasn't told about everything that happened on our farm. I only heard about the struggles, the crops, and the livestock, but I always felt something was off in this place. Sometimes at night, I would hear strange noises coming from the far end of the field. It sounded like something heavy being dragged across the ground. I would ask my father what it was, but he always said it was just the wind. I believed him, but deep down, I felt it was not true. As I grew older, I began noticing even stranger things. Sometimes my parents would disappear for whole nights, and when they came back, their faces looked grim, as though something heavy hung in the air. Father often told me not to go near the barn at the far end of the farm. "That's no place for children," he'd say. I didn't understand what that meant, but I always felt like something was being hidden from me. Soon, I started noticing that several locals had gone missing, and someone from the neighboring farm mentioned seeing my father in the woods at night. I didn't know what to think, but things got even stranger when I once again heard those sounds, the scraping, like something was being dragged across the earth. When I turned 18, I stayed alone on the farm. My parents decided to go to the city for a few days. I didn't know what to do with myself. That night, when they left, I felt an unsettling sense of dread. It was as if something wasn't right, as if something was waiting for me. I got up and went to the part of the farm I'd always been told to stay away from. It was at the edge of the woods. There, I discovered something terrifying. My father was digging up graves. He was doing something in the dark, something horrifying and perverse. I couldn't believe my eyes, but when I looked at him, he just smiled and said, "You've finally come." He told me that nothing on this farm had ever been ordinary. He was obsessed with creating the perfect being. He said that people were just material for experiments, and his work had started long ago. I didn't know what to think, but strange things were happening on the farm. My father was a cruel man, but now I saw how his cruelty took on different forms. He took people, but he didn't just destroy them, he turned them into something else. I was horrified to realize that everything I knew about life had been a lie. On the farm, there were new crops, strange bodies that had lost all human form, bodies with grotesque scars, as if they had been mutilated. Every day, I felt something dark filling the farm. I decided to find out what was happening in the underground chambers. Father often disappeared there, and every time he came back, it was worse. I went down into the dark catacombs beneath the farm and discovered a hidden place. A huge underground room filled with cages, strange tools, and human remains. I realized that my life would never be the same. I saw it firsthand. My father was using people as test subjects for his terrible experiments. He was trying to create a new, improved being using the human body as raw material. I was horrified by what I saw. These weren't just experiments. This was something much worse. It was a disgusting practice, bordering on monstrous crimes. But I couldn't stop him. I was trapped in this dark shadow that controlled everything in the house. I began to feel like I was losing myself. My father became someone who controlled everything around him. He was no longer the man I knew. He had turned into something much darker, monstrous. He made me take part in these horrible actions. Every day, I became more detached, and reality began to blur into nightmare. I lost touch with what was right. One night, I woke up hearing footsteps outside my door. I opened my eyes and saw something moving in the dark. It was a creature, one I had once known, but now it was distorted and unrecognizable as human. It had been created by my father, and now it had come for me. I didn't know what to do, but I knew one thing: I was not safe. My father had created a monster, and now it was ready to take me. Each night, these creatures became more real, and the farm turned into a true nightmare. I couldn't escape because all the paths were blocked. I was trapped. These monsters, made from human bodies, were no longer just killers. They were part of my father's plan. I felt my soul slowly disappearing, consumed by this horror. My father no longer spoke to me. He was silent, and his gaze had turned cold, merciless. He was consumed by what he had done, and he no longer wanted to stop. He said that I needed to become part of his work, part of this terrifying farm. But I couldn't. I was no longer who I had been. I felt myself becoming what my father had created. Father disappeared, and the farm stood like a monument to nightmare. I tried to escape, but I knew there was no way out. These monsters kept living, creating new horrors. In the end, I realized that this was only the beginning. The farm remained a place where torture and suffering were the norm. I was forced to become part of this nightmare. Now I am the last one left. But I couldn't run, because the farm is now part of me. I've become one of those creatures who were once human. My father made me this way. I can't escape. This place has become a part of me, and I will remain here forever, among its dark secrets. I had been working at the night fueling station for almost a year. It was a small, isolated station on the outskirts of town, in a desolate area. Rarely did cars pass by, and the customers were strange. At first, I thought I would just get used to the loneliness, but every day, this place started to feel creepier. As night fell, the station became quieter, and the shadows seemed to come alive. One night, I noticed a car parked at the pump, staying there longer than usual. It was strange because drivers typically didn't spend too much time at such remote stations. The driver didn't get out, and the car remained still, as if someone was sitting inside. That night, things started getting weird. The car remained at the pump without moving, as if someone was inside, but no one got out. I approached it, and noticed there was no one in the car. The windows were fogged up slightly, but something was off. I tried looking through the window, but as soon as I did, everything misted up and disappeared. When I returned to the booth, I suddenly heard footsteps. Someone was walking toward the station. I looked up and saw a man emerging from the darkness. He was tall, dressed in dark clothes, and had a hood covering his face. He didn't say a word, just walked up to the pump, filled his car, and left just as quickly as he came. Every day, I started feeling that this station was not just abandoned. Gradually, I began hearing strange noises, whispers coming from the dark corners of the station. Sometimes, it felt like I wasn't alone, like someone was watching me. One night, I heard someone quietly say behind me, "Remember, you will always be here." I turned around, but there was no one there. Only emptiness and the fog that surrounded the station. My heart started racing, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Fear overwhelmed me, but I couldn't leave. I had to stay until the end of my shift. I didn't know what to do, but I started noticing strange things. Cars that didn't move, people who disappeared, and night customers who always came back, even though there were no records of them. One morning, when I entered the building, I found a note on the counter. "Next, you." I tried to find a way out, but as soon as I reached the door, it wouldn't open. I tried breaking the window, but nothing worked. I was trapped. That night, when I was about to give up, the man in the hood appeared again. He stood by the pump, as if waiting for something. His face was hidden, but something about his movements was unnaturally smooth, like he wasn't human. I approached him and tried to speak, but he just stared into nothingness. When I dared to touch his shoulder, his body turned to mist and disappeared into the air, as if he had never been there. I stood there, shocked, not understanding what was happening. Everything around me grew darker, and the whispers in the air intensified. I realized that the station was not just a place for night travelers. It was something much more. I tried to leave the station, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape. Suddenly, I had a thought. I had become part of this place, part of the night sounds, the whispers, and the vanishing customers. I couldn't leave, because now this place was my home. And maybe it always had been. Tomorrow, night will come again. And maybe the next customer will be me. Or maybe not.